All right, everybody, let me go ahead and share my screen. We'll get into the third lecture for this week. And so we're going to talk about the movement intersectionality piece. And this one should be fairly short. I'm just going to touch on really some of the things to be mindful of and the three most important parts of why movement intersectionality is so important. So the first one being that it acknowledges lived experiences and power differentials due to inequality. So, right, depending on where you are on any given hierarchical structure, right? No matter what all your different positionalities are, all your different identities are, they intersect in ways that give you a unique set of personal perspectives. And while those can be shared in some ways with other people, they're not always shared in every way, right? Because again, we all have these unique lived experiences. And so really acknowledging that these lived experiences at all these different bajillion different intersections of identities create different power differentials and create inequalities that happen in different ways. And so the things that we especially may want in a movement may be very different. And so they use the example of, a reproductive justice movement from multiple different intersectional perspectives, right? But we can do that with just about any movement, right? The second thing really, it enables discussions of multiple differing groups that allow for commonalities to be placed, right? So while we may have all these different experiences, there may be an overarching idea of equity or equality for women, for instance, amongst all these different groups of women that we want, but we may want equality in very different ways. And really having those conversations allows us to see where our commonalities lie and how we can really have these conversations and give light to all these different perspectives and voices, so that we're making sure that, again, we don't have a feminist movement that is very centered on white upper class women. So that way we have movements that are focused on all the different needs of multiple different women and multiple different ways they need to experience equality. Lastly, it emphasizes the ways structures of oppression are related, right? So we can't really get rid of racism without getting rid of sexism, without getting rid of ableism, without getting rid of all these things, right? In order to really take away the marginalization women feel as a Black woman, they have marginalization as a Black person as well. So getting rid of their marginalization and making them equal would have to include getting rid of this marginalization under this race category as well, right? So getting rid of the marginalization or the inequalities that a disabled woman would feel would have to include getting rid of the inequalities felt through that disability as well, because they experience them as a woman. And so really having these conversations about how all these intersections and all of these structures based on oppression or based on hierarchies are related gives us a broader understanding of why fighting for not just the intersections that we hold or the oppressions that we hold is key to really unlocking the equity that we want for ourselves too, right? So you have to fight for equity across the board, or really not, equity's not reached, right? If that makes sense. Things to be mindful of when we have these conversations or as we move towards intersectionalities within movements is the idea that we have different vested interest, right? So I would have a vested interest in a movement that impacts queer women or impacts disabled women in ways that are very personal to me, right? That matter to me at a very personal lived experiences. However, when I go and want to be part of or be mindful of a woman, like a women of color, like of a movement geared towards women of color, then my vested interest in this is very different, right? My perspective on this is very different. And while I may have interest in equality, the amount of vested interest I have in that is wholeheartedly different when it is impacting me as a human or my kids or what have you as humans than it may be if it impacted someone else, even if I care about them. The vested interest is different depending on where your positionalities are and what even power or privilege you might garner out of them not achieving their goals, right? So really having really start conversations with ourselves and those around us about the differences in vested interest will make some of these things more successful. Also understanding that movement outcomes are going to vary and they're going to, what we see as a success is going to be different depending on who we are. What we see as something we want to happen is going to be different depending on who we are. And understanding that taking any specific issue and relaying the success of that per one group doesn't equal the success of it for other groups. And so understanding that we need to talk through those outcomes in ways that are relatable and also that are successful for a multitude of groups within a specific movement. And last, we really just need to be mindful of making sure that we're not speaking for, over, or through those who sit beside us, sit next to us, sit across from us, right? We cannot hold the experiences of all women because no one person is all women, right? And so making sure that we understand that we cannot speak for, over, or through those who have different positionalities than we do ourselves really helps to garner a more successful activist movement, more successful movement overarchingly. So again, this requires us to do some of those things we talked about in other lectures, really acknowledge our own positionality, acknowledge where we sit, how we're sitting, how we're engaging with conversations about how we impact the lives of others and how others impact our lives. And so really that's all I'm gonna dive into on this because I think that really hits home the main core points and the things that I really want you all to get out of it. All right, so I will see you again in the next lecture. Take care, everybody.